Plenty of news to get into here at GPFans today as the world of Formula One continues to spin, much like those wheels on the cars themselves. We're talking about the Australian border policy that Novak Djokovic has had trouble with, and perhaps a warning, therefore, that it proves for Formula One as we return to Albert Park this year. And Zak Brown talking about B teams in Formula One. He thinks they do exist, and he thinks they could be a problem in the future as well. We'll get into those in just a moment. Before we go any further, just hit the subscribe button down below to stay up to date with all of the content we produce here at the channel as we build up to the new season in 2022. But now, let's get into the all-important headlines. First up, McLaren CEO Zak Brown has called for an end to B-team bias within Formula One rules that he feels is damaging the fabric of the sport. Although no constructor would ever call themselves a B-team, the links that AlphaTauri and Haas have with Red Bull and Ferrari respectively, and the ties Williams and Aston Martin share with Mercedes, does give the McLaren boss's comments plenty of weight, with Brown feeling that such bonds could ultimately lead to the formation of full-on B teams in F1, which is a topic that has been discussed in the past when looking at ways to open up more spots on the F1 grid to young drivers and more teams. Brown feels the threat of B teams is still very much in the picture and doesn't like the idea one bit, as he noted in his column on the McLaren website, saying, "The regulations as they stand today are heavily biased towards B teams / customer teams, which is not in line with F1's pinnacle of a group of genuine constructors competing with one another on even terms. It is diminishing what being an F1 team means and the fabric of the sport. F1 needs to be 10 true constructors, where each team, apart from sharing the PU and potentially the gearbox internals, must design and produce all parts which are performance relevant. Right now there is too much diversity in the business models between teams. Trying to apply the same set of complex regulations to each and then policing them effectively is needlessly complicated and compromised as a result." Brown feels that in a cost cap era when all teams are operating on an equal footing, no team should be beholden to another, particularly as that has a knock-on effect when it comes to voting on certain aspects of F1. This cost cap environment should allow teams to become more recognisable entities in their own right within a realistic budget, without the concern of significant performance differences based on how much each team can spend, added Brown. In a nutshell, the current situation allows B teams to be over-competitive compared to constructors, and A teams to be over-competitive by having the benefit of a B team. Without a correction, the way things stand means that any team with championship aspirations needs to have a B team in place, and that simply is not Formula One. On top of this, the voting pressure placed by the A teams on their B teams is not consistent with the promotion of equitable sport based on individual team merit. As I've said before, and these teams won't admit to it, there are times when some smaller teams vote against their own interest to satisfy the agenda of their A team. We've actually discussed this on GPFans in the Stewards Room podcast in the past, likening this to perhaps football teams loaning out their players to sister clubs, etc. And Brown, like many I'm sure, is dead against this whole A team, B team fiasco. Talking of fiascos, let's talk about the Australian border, as Australian Grand Prix Corporation Chief Executive Andrew Westacott expects F1 to be compliant with strict vaccination policies in order to avoid a repeat of the Novak Djokovic deportation saga. Men's world tennis number one Djokovic was at the centre of a media storm ahead of the Australian Open in Melbourne after the unvaccinated Serbian was detained, then deported for failing to meet federal coronavirus requirements. In Australia, all international arrivals must be fully vaccinated, with the case of Djokovic serving as an example for future events, including F1. It's a massive global story, and it's been out there for every sports fan and every sports journalist across the globe to report on, and therefore it's brought focus on Melbourne and focus on the issue, Westacott told the Sydney Morning Herald. Because of the outcome of that issue, it hasn't necessarily been observed favourably in the same way you get positive kudos at the end of staging these wonderful tournaments. Major events are a double-edged sword, and you always see this in the lead up to and the staging of massive events, be it F1, Grand Slams, majors in golf, Commonwealth Games and Olympic Games. If you stage them well, you get a pat on the back, and if you stage them poorly or there are issues, you're judged in the court of public opinion. That's what has happened here, and it's up to sports fans or sports journalists to say whether we've lost our gloss. But there's no doubt that people have been sitting in judgment and observing it in many areas. I know that because we deal with a lot of people on a global basis. So Australia does get its Grand Prix back this year, and we're all excited to get back to Albert Park once more. The teams, though, will have to go through these same rules and restrictions that Djokovic has done. Will everybody comply? Well, we'll see when we get there on the calendar. We've got stories on GPFans.com about how Martin Brundle is chastising Toto Wolff for the Mercedes team principal's comments to Michael Massey during the final race of last season. And Alan Prost keeps on cropping up in the news again. He's talking about how he almost ran for president of the FIA. Those, as I say, on gpfans.com, and on Twitter and Instagram too. Get on to @GPFansGlobal. And of course, hit the subscribe button down below to stick with us here at the YouTube channel.